When someone heads out on a hunting trip, they're usually deep in the heart of the forest, surrounded by nothing but trees, silence, and the unsettling vastness of nature. No roads, no houses, no people for miles. It sounds like the perfect backdrop for a horror story, doesn't it? These next three stories, which are said to be true, prove just how terribly wrong a simple hunting trip can go. The first one was submitted to me back in June by a man named Robert Scherneman. His story takes place in upstate New York, a region I happen to know well, and this is how it goes. I've been an avid hunter for as long as I can remember. It was my father who first introduced me to the woods, taking me out every Saturday morning since I was a kid. It became more than just a hobby. It was a tradition, a ritual, one I always knew I'd pass down to my own son. At the time of this story, my boy Peter was 10 years old. I figured that was a good age, old enough to start learning the ropes, young enough for it to leave a lasting impression. I decided to bring him out with me for the first time. I brought along 2 Remington Model 798 sniper rifles, one for each of us. But I held on to both guns until we found a spot, a quiet, familiar clearing where I'd often seen game in the past. Now, we could have used the old deer hunting tower deeper in the woods, tucked far off the trail where no one would find us. But something about that idea didn't sit right with me. Maybe it felt too isolated for his first time, too intense, too unwelcoming. So I chose a more open area, somewhere he could ease into the experience. Once we were set up and ready, I finally handed Peter the rifle. Of course, I'd already taught him the basics, how to handle the weapon, safety protocols, how to breathe and line up a shot. It wasn't like I'd dragged him out into the woods and put a gun in his hands cold. He knew what he was doing, as much as any 10-year-old could. But looking back now, I wonder if I'd underestimated just how strange, how wrong that day would become. I decided we'd stay in that one spot for his first time out, keeping things simple. It'd be easier on Peter, and I figured we could work our way up to the more advanced methods of hunting in later sessions. No need to overwhelm him. But there was a lot of waiting, more than usual for this particular spot. And I could tell Peter was starting to feel it. He kept yawning, sighing, shifting where he sat. The boredom was written all over his face. And that disappointed me. I didn't want his first experience with the sport to be dull, to feel like nothing but endless silence and stillness. That's not what hunting is. It's about patience, sure, but it's also about thrill, timing, instinct. I didn't want him to lose interest before he ever got to feel that. So I made a decision. I quietly packed up our gear and whispered to him, "Let's move." He immediately lit up, eyes wide with a flicker of excitement, and I felt a little spark of pride. That was what I wanted. Not boredom, curiosity, eagerness. The sense that something could happen at any moment. We started walking through the woods, the leaves crunching faintly beneath our boots. The air was cool and still. A thin fog had begun to settle between the trees, and the sun filtering through the canopy painted everything in pale, ghostly light. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not ours. They came from up ahead, slow, heavy, deliberate. I instinctively threw my arm out in front of Peter, stopping him cold. He froze, eyes darting to mine, and I motioned for him to raise his rifle. He did so, hands trembling just slightly, the way a kid's would when adrenaline kicks in for the first time. His breath caught in his throat. He was ready. But then I saw it. Just beyond the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 yards out, a head peeked out from behind a thick pine trunk. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. Only for a moment, just long enough for me to catch a glimpse. A pale, human face, partially hidden in the shadows, staring back at us. My gut twisted. Immediately, I reached over and pushed Peter's rifle down, firm but careful. He looked up at me, confused, probably disappointed, but I just gave him a look, stern and quiet, and he seemed to understand. The stranger didn't say anything, didn't move. I gave him a small, awkward wave, sort of an apology, like, sorry, didn't realize anyone else was out here. I wanted to show we meant no harm. He didn't wave back. He just pulled back behind the tree and vanished from sight. Just like that. And suddenly, the woods felt too quiet. The breeze had stopped. The fog seemed thicker now. Something about it didn't sit right with me. Not at all. Was he another hunter? I couldn't tell. Maybe. But something about him didn't sit right with me. Even from that distance, obscured by trees and shadows, there was something off about his face. I couldn't explain it at the time. Nothing obvious. Just a strange, subtle wrongness, like his features didn't quite fit together the way they should. Not disfigured exactly, just unnatural, unsettling. And the fact that we'd encountered anyone this far into the woods, that was rare enough on its own. This spot was deep, isolated, not the kind of place where you casually stumble across someone. And the way he was dressed, it didn't scream hunter. No orange vest, no visible gear, just that pale face staring out from behind the tree. So, acting on instinct, maybe caution, I turned us around. Gently, without saying much, I guided Peter in the opposite direction. We still hadn't seen any deer. No tracks, no rustling, nothing. It was strange. The forest felt empty, like the wildlife had all vanished. Peter eventually asked the question I knew was coming. He looked up at me and said, "Who was that guy?" I kept my voice calm. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I don't think we should get any closer." I didn't want to scare him, but I also didn't want to lie. A few minutes passed. The stillness of the forest pressed in around us, and Peter began to fidget again. "I'm hungry," he muttered, and honestly, so was I. So we stopped and took a break, settling down near a fallen log. I unpacked the sandwiches and passed one to Peter. He sat beside me, quiet now, chewing slowly. I tried to focus on the food, but frustration was creeping in. We'd seen nothing. No deer, no sign of movement, except for that man. I'd hoped for more from this trip, something meaningful, especially for Peter's first time. But now, it just felt wrong, off track. As I took a bite of my sandwich, I heard it again. Footsteps, far off, but not far enough, crunching through leaves and twigs, steady, slow. Peter heard it too. He froze, sandwich halfway to his mouth. Without a word, he reached for his rifle, raising it like I'd shown him. His hands were shaking slightly. Then I saw him again. The man. He was watching us from behind another tree, a different one now, at a different angle, closer than before. Just standing there, staring. His head leaned just slightly out from the tree's edge. No movement, no sound, just those eyes fixed on us, unblinking. I felt my stomach drop. I reached over and gently, but firmly, lowered Peter's rifle again.
I could tell from the way his posture shifted that he was no longer excited. He looked uneasy, nervous, and honestly, so was I. I told Peter to stay put, right where he was, and I stood up. I didn't want to scare him, so I kept my voice calm. But inside, I was bracing myself. My heart was beating faster now, and every step I took toward that man felt heavier than the last.
I was preparing myself, not physically, but emotionally, to confront him, to walk right up and ask him what the hell he was doing out here, shadowing us. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe. But the truth? Halfway there, I froze. My boots crunched to a stop on the forest floor, and I just stood there in silence, breathing a little harder, staring at the tree where I'd last seen him. And then the thought hit me, cold and clear. What the hell am I doing? My son is right over there. Everything shifted in that moment. Whatever bravado I had, gone. I turned on my heel and made my way back to Peter, more quickly now. When I reached him, I kept my voice steady but urgent. "We're leaving," I told him. And just like that, we packed up what little we'd taken out and started heading back. No sprinting, no panic, just a brisk, purposeful walk through the woods toward the road. But inside, I was screaming. If you were deep in the woods with your son by your side, and you thought, even felt, that someone was following you, stalking you, then you'd understand. You wouldn't care about finishing the hunt. You just want to get your kid out, safely, as fast as possible. We didn't talk. The forest was too quiet, too tense. Every step we took felt watched. And I was mentally waiting, listening for the sound. A twig snapping, a leaf crunching, something behind us. And then it happened. Just a single crack, the faintest shift of weight on the forest floor. Without hesitation, I nudged Peter ahead of me. "Go on," I said quietly. "Keep walking. Don't stop." He looked at me but didn't ask questions. He just moved forward, faster now. I turned around, furious. I wasn't thinking anymore, not clearly. I was angry, protective, running on pure instinct. I stormed toward the figure. Once again, the same man, just barely visible behind another tree. Same posture, same stillness, just standing there, peering at us with that same dead stare. I didn't care how creepy he looked now. I didn't care what his face did or didn't look like. I was done with the games. I closed the distance fast, probably got within 30 feet of the tree, and right then, just as I expected, he vanished again, slid back behind the tree like a shadow. But this time, there was something different. As soon as he disappeared, I heard a thud, a low, solid sound, like something heavy had just been dropped onto the ground. It echoed faintly through the still trees, and I stopped cold. I had my rifle gripped tightly in my hand, fully loaded, as I inched closer to the tree. I didn't say a word, not to myself, not to anyone. I don't even know why. Maybe part of me knew words wouldn't help. There was just this strange, paralyzing silence in my head as I crept forward, step by step, breath held. Each movement felt slower than the last, like the air around me had thickened. The forest had gone deathly still. No birds, no wind, no sound at all. It was like the world had paused or collapsed in on itself. And then I saw it. Lying right there on the ground, face down in the dead leaves, was
head. Just the head. No body, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no trail. Just a human head resting on the forest floor like it had been carefully placed there. I stopped breathing. My vision tunneled. Everything else around me, the trees, the cold air, the dirt beneath my boots, faded into nothing. All I could focus on was that. I didn't look up, didn't check behind the tree, didn't call out. I didn't want to know who had dropped it there. Some part of me, the primal part, was screaming at me to get away, to run. So I did. I turned and bolted, legs nearly giving out beneath me, and sprinted back toward Peter as fast as I could. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. We didn't stop, not once, just ran through the woods, through the underbrush, not caring about the noise or the direction as long as it led out. My heart was pounding like a war drum in my chest, lungs burning as we broke into a clearing and saw the road up ahead. We made it home within 5 minutes, and I made absolutely sure we weren't followed. I checked every direction, watched the tree line for movement, even circled the house before stepping inside. But that wasn't enough. I stayed up the entire night, didn't sleep, didn't turn off the lights, just sat near the front window, rifle within reach, watching, listening, waiting. Not because I was afraid for myself, but because of my family, my wife, my son. I wasn't going to let anything come near them. The next morning, my wife shared something with me that turned my blood to ice. She'd heard on the local news that 2 hunters had gone missing recently, both from our area, both out in the woods. And just like that, I knew. That's when I called the police. I told them what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. I didn't leave anything out, not even the head. I had to be cautious after that. For months, I didn't go back out. No hunting, no trips. I wasn't going to risk it, not with Peter. Eventually, though, I eased back into it. We've gone out a few times since then, carefully, always to different areas, always alert. But what still haunts me, what baffles me, is how that man, whoever he was, managed to take down not just 1, but 2 hunters, men who would have been armed, trained, ready. And yet, somehow, he took them. No signs, no struggle, just a head. That's the part I'll never understand. The next story was submitted to me only a month ago by someone named Nathan Zielinski. It's not strictly a hunting story, more of a strange blend between hunting and camping, but it definitely belongs in this collection. Here's what Nathan shared. It was my first time hunting. I was 21. My friends, Anthony, Christian, Tom, and Tom's girlfriend Diana had invited me on this trip to some park out in Colorado. The goal? Elk hunting. I wasn't exactly thrilled, but I went along. We brought 2 large tents, sleeping bags, enough food and drinks to last a couple of days, and, of course, guns. Anthony handed me one, just a standard-looking hunting rifle. I couldn't even tell you what kind. I didn't ask. It looked basic enough, and honestly, that was all I needed to know. Truth be told, I wasn't sure how I felt about the whole thing. The idea of killing a living, breathing creature, something with a heartbeat and a will to live, all for the sake of what people like to call fun, it didn't sit right with me. Something about it just felt wrong. But this was the 5th time Anthony had asked me to join, and I felt like I couldn't say no again. So I gave in. Still, I quietly made the decision. I wasn't going to shoot anything. I'd come along for the ride, for the experience, but I wasn't pulling the trigger.
About halfway through the drive, Anthony pulled into a gravel lot off the road. We got out, unpacked the car, slung our gear over our shoulders, and hiked roughly a mile into the forest before we stopped to set up camp. Once the tents were pitched and our stuff was settled, Anthony immediately took the lead, marching ahead and rattling off everything he knew about elk hunting like a walking Wikipedia page. He was clearly proud of himself, confident, maybe too confident. I wanted to laugh. I wanted someone else to catch my eye so we could share a grin or a smirk, but no one was on my wavelength. Everyone else, even Diana, looked totally locked in, like they were listening to the gospel according to Saint Anthony. I couldn't help myself. I tried to cut through the self-serious atmosphere with a jab. "Hey, Anthony, wouldn't it be better to stop talking if you don't want to scare away any potential prey?" He didn't laugh, not even a chuckle. He just gave me a sharp look, his mouth tight, eyes narrowed, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. He took this way more seriously than I thought. After that, I shut up. And by after that, I mean until everything stopped feeling normal, which, as it turned out, wasn't very long. During our hunt, we crossed paths with a group of people, and I use that word lightly. There were 3 of them. 3 large, dirty-looking men with matted, greasy hair hanging past their shoulders in tangled clumps. Their skin looked like it hadn't seen soap in years, streaked with grime and sweat. Their clothes were torn and stained, like they'd been wearing the same thing for weeks straight. And the way they moved, slow, heavy, eyes fixed on us without blinking, it was enough to stop all of us in our tracks. They didn't speak, not a word. As we passed them on the narrow trail, they each gave this slight, eerie nod, like they were acknowledging us. A lazy dip of the chin, almost too synchronized. It might have looked harmless to someone else, might have even seemed polite. But out there, deep in the woods, completely alone, it was chilling. It might sound like something out of a bad backwoods horror movie, hillbilly creeps with inbred eyes, something easy to mock if you're safe behind a screen. But being there, in the silence of the forest, miles from anyone or anything, it was a different story. They looked like they belonged to some forgotten clan, tucked away in some rotting shack deep in the woods, far from any kind of civilization. Something about them screamed wrong. We were far from the lot by then, and for the record, when we'd arrived, the lot was completely empty. No other cars, no signs of people, which made it even stranger that we'd come across anyone out here at all. It might sound exaggerated, but those 3 men, they didn't just look creepy. They looked dangerous. We all felt it, the tension. Even Anthony, who usually brushed things off, was quiet as we moved past them, one by one, glancing over our shoulders. Thankfully, they didn't follow us. We kept moving, trying not to talk about it too much, like even saying it aloud would somehow make it worse. And eventually, we got back into the rhythm of the hunt. Anthony ended up shooting a deer. No elk in sight, but he was satisfied with the kill. We dragged the deer all the way back to camp,
Heavy, awkward, leaving a red trail behind us in the dirt and leaves. That was dinner for the night. Anthony and Tom got to work immediately, going through the bloody, gut-wrenching process of skinning the deer. I didn't watch for long. Just a few seconds was enough. The sound of tearing muscle, the smell of fresh blood, it hit me harder than I expected. I turned away. Whatever my feelings were about the hunt itself, I had to admit, Anthony came prepared. He'd brought burger buns, seasonings, everything he needed to turn fresh venison into something resembling a real meal. He cooked us up venison burgers right there at the campsite, over the fire. And while I still didn't agree with the whole sport side of it, I had to give credit where it was due.
Anthony knew what he was doing. We turned in for the night as soon as darkness settled over the woods. The fire outside was still burning, its orange glow flickering through the thin tent fabric, casting shifting shadows against the nylon walls. Everyone had gone quiet. The sounds of the forest had taken over again. Distant chirps, the occasional rustle of wind through the trees, the crackle of the dying fire. I lay there, wide awake, struggling to get comfortable. Anthony and Christian were already snoring lightly, passed out within minutes of crawling into their sleeping bags. Meanwhile, I was tossing and turning like I was lying on a bed of rocks. Every twist made the synthetic fabric squeak, and I couldn't find a position that didn't make my back hurt or my legs cramp. Sleeping bags and I don't get along, never have. I must have been rolling around for at least 2 hours, eyes flicking open every few minutes, half lost in frustration and that weird state between exhaustion and restlessness. At one point, I gave up. I was just about to unzip the tent and step outside to pee when I heard it. Footsteps, soft, slow, crunching faintly through the dry leaves and twigs just outside our tent. I froze, every muscle in my body locked up. My first instinct was to whisper, to call out to Tom or Diana. Maybe one of them had gotten up. Maybe they were heading out for the same reason I was. But then a thought stopped me cold. What if it's not them? I kept my mouth shut. Instead, I lay completely still, straining to hear. My heartbeat was thudding in my ears now, loud enough that I worried it might drown out whatever was outside. Then came the sound that made every hair on my arms rise. The zipper. Ours. It was being pulled down. Not fast, not slow, just this steady, deliberate slide as the tent opened. My breath caught in my throat. Without thinking, I turned my head sharply to the side, away from the entrance, and shut my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Whoever it was just stood there. I could feel it, their presence just beyond the open flap, heavy, watching. A few seconds passed, seconds that felt like minutes. Then, slowly, the zipper went back up. That same deliberate motion. A pause. Then the faint footsteps again, crunching as they moved away from our tent, toward Tom and Diana's. And just like that, the tension in my chest let go, but only slightly. I took a silent breath, thinking, it must have been them, Tom or Diana, maybe checking if we were asleep so they could, mess around a little. That had to be it, right? I waited about 5 more minutes, giving them time to settle back in or do whatever it was they were planning to do. Then I got an idea. If they were trying to be sneaky, Maybe I'd return the favor. So I unzipped our tent slowly, grinning a little to myself, and crept out into the cool night air. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting just enough light for me to see their tent about 20 feet away. I moved quietly, keeping my steps light, careful not to make a sound. But when I reached their tent, I froze. Their zipper was still undone, wide open, just hanging there, the flap swaying slightly in the breeze. That's weird, I thought, really weird. I crept toward the tent, still thinking I was about to pull a prank on two lovebirds trying to sneak some privacy. But as I got closer, close enough to see through the opening, my stomach turned to ice. Inside the tent were two men, not Tom, not Anthony. Two strangers hunched over Diana, doing something to her. I couldn't even process what, but it was wrong. I didn't think, I didn't hesitate. I just screamed, as loud as I could. It came out raw, a mix of panic, fear, and desperation. My only thought was to wake up the others, to get help now. Within seconds, Anthony and Christian burst out of our tent, rifles in hand, wild-eyed and still half groggy from sleep. The two men inside Tom and Diana's tent jumped up and fled, bolting into the woods without a word, disappearing into the dark like shadows. But even in that moment of chaos, I recognized them. They were two of the three men we'd passed earlier that day, the ones with the filthy hair and hollow eyes. There was no mistaking it. Tom and Anthony raised their rifles and fired into the air, not to hit them, but to scare them off. The sound of the shots cracked through the night, echoing across the trees. And for a second, it felt like that might be the end of it. But then something happened that froze us all where we stood. From every direction, the bushes, the trees, the shadows just beyond the firelight, figures began to move. Men, all around us, dozens of them. They hadn't made a sound before. They'd been hiding, crouched in the brush, tucked behind tree trunks. And now, in the chaos of the gunshots, they were scattering, sprinting off into the woods in every direction, like insects when the light turns on. We stood there in stunned silence, completely surrounded, watching them flee. We hadn't even realized how badly outnumbered we were. Our first instinct was to check on Tom and Diana, but when we rushed into the tent, they weren't waking up. Their bodies were limp, breathing shallow, unresponsive. Something was wrong. Anthony checked their arms, their necks. "I think they were drugged," he muttered. "Injected with something, probably a tranquilizer." We had no choice but to wait. Every minute felt like an hour. We kept our rifles close and eyes scanning the tree line, not saying much, just listening to the forest breathe around us. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves setting us on edge. Eventually, after what felt like half an eternity, they came to. Groggy, confused, scared. We didn't waste time. We grabbed what we could and ran. Stumbling through pitch-black forest with adrenaline burning in our veins was one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every sound felt like someone behind us. We didn't stop, didn't look back. Eventually, we found the lot, the same empty one we'd pulled into, and piled into the car, peeling out onto the road, not saying a word until the trees were nothing but silhouettes in the rearview mirror. We still don't know who those people were. Maybe it was some kind of secluded inbreeding clan, like something out of a horror story. Maybe a cannibalistic cult for all we knew. The truth is, we never found out, and we didn't want to. We have no idea what they were planning to do with Tom and Diana that night. But we're just grateful, unbelievably grateful, that we all made it out of there alive. This last story was written by someone who goes by the name Jared the Sprinter, and it details a hunting experience unlike anything you'd expect. Something that started like any other night and ended in pure terror. Here's what he shared. I was out night hunting for hogs in the woods behind my house, something I've done more times than I can count. That patch of forest practically feels like mine. I've been roaming it for over a decade. I was posted up in the hunting tower I built myself about 10 years ago. Sturdy, elevated, good view of the tree lines. Exactly where I like to be when I hunt at night. In case anyone's wondering, yeah, I had a night vision scope attachment on my rifle. I don't mess around when I go out there. I guess you could say I'm what most would call a hardcore hunter. But I'll be honest with you, I don't want to drag this story out with unnecessary details. I know how this is going to sound, and I get that it might come off like some creepy campfire tale or something you'd find on a conspiracy forum. But this is real. It happened. And as terrifying as it was, part of me feels lucky that I have a story like this to tell. It's the kind of thing that buries itself deep in your memory. The kind that sticks. So, here's what happened. I was sitting up there in the tower, rifle resting across my lap, just watching, waiting for movement in the brush below. The air was still, quiet, just me and the night. Eventually, something stirred. I raised the rifle and looked through the scope, expecting to see a hog, maybe a lone boar, maybe a group of them. But what I saw was not an animal. It was a man. He was walking along the edge of the tree line, slowly, deliberately, wearing all black. Black sweatpants, black shoes, black hoodie, hood up over his head. The kind of outfit you wear when you don't want to be noticed. But that wasn't even the part that rattled me. He was dragging a sack. A long, heavy-looking sack, trailing behind him and leaving a faint path through the grass. His posture was stiff, like he was hauling something weighty, maybe something awkwardly shaped inside. My heart started pounding. Everything in me was screaming that this guy wasn't just some harmless night hiker. No flashlight, no gear, no weapon in sight, just him and that sack. I was pretty sure I was watching someone burying a body. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just kept watching through the scope, hands tightening on the rifle. Then, something changed. He slowed down. His steps became more hesitant. And then, I swear to God, he lifted his head right up toward me. As if he knew I was watching, as if he could see me, despite the elevation, despite the dark. I ducked, dropped flat against the wooden walls of the tower, heart racing so loud I could hear it echo in my ears. My hands were shaking, my whole body felt cold. Yes, I had a gun, but the idea of having to use it, not on an animal, but on a person, made my skin crawl. There's a line, you know, even for hunters. And in that moment, I felt like I was staring across that line into something I didn't understand, something I wasn't prepared for. I stayed low, pressed flat against the wooden boards of the tower, barely breathing. I silently prayed to God that he hadn't actually seen me, that maybe it was just a coincidence, a trick of movement, a wild guess. It shouldn't have made sense. It was practically pitch black out here. The night was dense, the trees thick, and I hadn't made a sound. He couldn't have seen me. He shouldn't have. That was the logic I clung to. But logic means nothing when your pulse is hammering through your chest like a war drum, and every second feels like an eternity. I waited, listening, hoping to hear his footsteps moving away. Maybe the sound of leaves crunching or brush parting, anything that meant he was leaving. But instead, what I heard was a single, unmistakable sound, a foot landing on wood, the wood of my ladder. It creaked beneath the weight. Just one footstep, but it vibrated through the entire structure, rattling up the beams and straight into my spine. Then, another step, and another. 3 deliberate steps climbing up the ladder. I went ice cold. I couldn't see him, but I could feel him. Feel the movement of the tower, the groan of aged wood, the tiny shifts in pressure that only come when something is alive and close, right below me. And in that moment, the question crashed into my mind like a hammer. Am I really prepared to shoot someone? Because this wasn't a boar. This wasn't an animal. This was a person. And even if he was dangerous, even if he was about to climb into my tower and do something unthinkable, the idea of pulling that trigger, of ending a life, made my hands lock up. But then, silence. No fourth step, just stillness. Then came a dull thud, the sound of someone dropping back down to the forest floor. I heard the faint scrape of something heavy being dragged again, and then nothing. He was gone. I stayed frozen, stiff as a corpse, for what had to be 10 minutes, maybe longer. My body refused to move. My breathing stayed shallow. I didn't want to make a single sound that might bring him back. Eventually, slowly, I edged up just far enough to peek over the ledge. The woods were empty. Nothing stirred. The coast was clear, or so it seemed. I knew I had to move. I had to get home. I had to call the police immediately. So I swung my legs over the side of the platform and began climbing down the same ladder he'd stepped on. My hands trembled on every rung. Once I hit the ground, I pulled out my pocket flashlight, something I now realize was a terrible decision. But at the time, it felt like the only way to see where I was going. I clicked it on. The beam sliced through the darkness in a narrow cone of light. Every tree, every shadow felt hostile. And then I ran. I sprinted through the woods, not stopping, not turning around, desperate to get back to my house before whatever that was, whoever that was, decided to come back. I had only been running for about 10 seconds, just long enough to feel like I might actually make it, when I heard it. Rapid, manic footsteps, fast, heavy, exploding through the underbrush behind me, crunching leaves, snapping branches, getting closer with every second. I barely had time to react. I turned my head just for a second, and he was right there, inches away. I could see the whites of his eyes, wild, glinting in the beam of my flashlight. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a snarl, wasn't quite human. Instinct took over. I spun around, raised my rifle, and fired. The shot cracked through the trees, and I saw the round hit him in the shoulder. He stopped cold. His scream tore through the night, raw, animalistic, a horrible blend of pain and fury. He dropped to one knee, clutching the wound, and in that moment of chaos, I ran. I didn't think, I didn't look back again. I used that moment to sprint the rest of the way to my house, lungs burning, heart pounding like a drum inside my skull. And yeah, looking back now, maybe I should have held him there. Maybe I could have kept my rifle trained on him and waited for the cops. Maybe. But none of that matters now. What mattered was getting home, getting help. Within 15 minutes of my call, the police showed up. Not just one or two officers, but a whole search squad, armed with flashlights, dogs, and the kind of seriousness you only see when they know something bad really happened. I led them into the woods, straight to the exact spot where I'd fired my shot. There, on the forest floor, was a blood trail. It wasn't gushing, but it was enough. A faint smear across the leaves and dirt, leading past something I hadn't even noticed in my panic the first time. A body bag, zipped shut, abandoned in the dark. The police seized it immediately, and I stayed close as they followed the trail, rifles drawn, eyes scanning the trees. It didn't take long. The blood led them just a little farther, right to a fallen log nestled next to a tree. That's where they found him, the maniac, crouched beneath the log like some feral animal trying to disappear. His breathing was labored, his shoulder slick with blood, but he was alive. They pulled him out, cuffed him, and took him into custody. Turns out, he wasn't just some random psycho. He was wanted for the murder of Jen Quen Sakanaki, a local Japanese corner store owner. I didn't know the full story, still don't, but it was real, horrifyingly real. And I had stumbled into it, or maybe it had stumbled into me. All I know is this: I'll never forget that night. Not ever. And I'll probably be telling this story for the rest of my life.